Did you know that during the filming of The Passion of the Christ, supernatural events so impressive occurred that to this day most of those involved refuse to talk about them? What Mel Gibson and his crew experienced on the filming sets went far beyond cinema. Events that defy any scientific explanation, miracles documented by doctors, and manifestations that made some of Hollywood's most skeptical professionals fall to their knees in prayer. We're talking about instantaneous healings that left specialists bewildered, light apparitions that were captured by cameras but couldn't be reproduced, and coincidences so impossible that they transformed actors' lives forever. Jim Caviezel, the man who dared to portray Jesus Christ, suffered so many accidents during filming that the medical team itself began questioning whether this was accidental or if something greater was happening. Lightning strikes that fell exactly at the moment of crucifixions, wounds that appeared out of nowhere and healed without leaving scars, climate changes that seemed to respond to the script. If you seek to understand the divine mysteries that happen around us, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share in the comments your own spiritual experiences that may connect with what you're about to discover. But why did these events occur precisely during the Passion of the Christ? The answer may lie in the very nature of what Mel Gibson decided to do. He wasn't simply making a movie. In his mind, tormented by addictions and depression, Gibson had become obsessed with a mission he himself described as divine. And when you mess with sacred forces, those forces respond. When Gibson began this project in the late 90s, he was in one of the darkest moments of his life. Financial success, worldwide fame, power in Hollywood, but inside, a fierce battle against personal demons that almost destroyed him. It was during one of those nights of despair that Gibson, according to what he revealed in interviews kept secret, had what he calls an experience that changed everything. Sources close to the actor report that he woke up one morning with the complete vision of how he should film the crucifixion, including details he had never read anywhere. From that moment on, Gibson became completely obsessed with the idea of showing Christ's sacrifice exactly as it happened. No superficial Hollywood, no romanticization. Real blood, real pain, real languages. When he presented the project to studios, the reaction was unanimous. No one would watch a 2-hour movie in Aramaic and Latin about religious torture. Gibson was literally thrown out of every office he entered. But something inside him wouldn't allow him to give up. When he decided to invest his own $30 million in the project, everyone in Hollywood thought he had gone completely insane. But Gibson knew he was being guided by something greater than himself. The choice of Jim Caviezel to portray Jesus was another moment that defied explanations. Gibson said he immediately knew Caviezel was the chosen one when he looked into his eyes during an audition. What Gibson never told publicly is that, according to unconfirmed reports, during that audition, the temperature of the room where they were dropped drastically and a different light began to fall upon Caviezel, even though they were in a closed environment. But the real test that something supernatural was happening came during the actual filming. Already in the first weeks, inexplicable events began occurring with a frequency that scared even the most experienced technicians. The spiritual preparation Gibson demanded from the entire crew included fasting, collective prayers, and moments of silence before each important scene. Something that had never been done in a Hollywood production. When the cameras began rolling, the atmosphere on set changed completely. Crew members described a sensation that someone else was present during filming. It wasn't something you saw, but something deeply felt. During the filming of the Sermon on the Mount, something happened that would change everything. Jim Caviezel was struck by lightning. Not a spark, not an electric shock. Real lightning, in broad daylight with no clouds in the sky. The incident was so impressive that assistant director Jan Michelini, who was also struck by another lightning bolt minutes later, described it as an experience that shouldn't be possible. Caviezel survived, but the impact was so strong that he had to undergo 2 heart surgeries years later. The most disturbing thing wasn't the lightning itself, but the timing. It happened exactly at the moment Caviezel was pronouncing the words, "Blessed are those who suffer persecution." Sources close to the production revealed that similar events happened during other crucial scenes. When Caviezel carried the cross for the first time, a sandstorm appeared out of nowhere in a region that had no history of storms and disappeared completely as soon as the scene ended. During the crucifixion, the sky darkened in a way that left local meteorologists confused, as there was no forecast for climate change that day. When spiritual forces manifest in our physical world, we need wisdom to interpret them correctly. If you value this type of revealing content and want to help us continue bringing these deep investigations, consider acquiring our ebook, The Secret of Jesus' Apparitions, for a symbolic value. This exclusive material offers keys to decipher divine signs and understand how Christ manifests in our days. Your contribution allows us to maintain this independent research work. The link to acquire the material is available in the pinned comment. What happened during the filming of the flagellation scene was so disturbing that Mel Gibson considered stopping production. Jim Caviezel was protected by a plate on his back to receive the whip blows, but during one of the takes, something went wrong. The whip went over the protection and hit Caviezel with such force that he couldn't breathe. But what shocked everyone wasn't just the accident, it was what happened afterward. When Caviezel turned to look at the actor who had hit him, witnesses reported that his face had changed completely. His features became unrecognizable for a few seconds, and a voice that wasn't his came out of his mouth. Curse words that the devout Catholic Caviezel would never use under normal circumstances. It was as if, for a moment, something very ancient and irritated had taken control. The actor later didn't remember saying those words. During the cross-carrying sequence, what should have been an enactment became reality in a frightening way. The solid wood cross was heavy but manageable. However, during filming, Caviezel began to stagger in a way that wasn't in the script. His shoulders dislocated, and the weight of the cross seemed to have increased dramatically. Crew members tried to help, but Caviezel insisted on continuing, as if driven by a force he himself didn't understand. What most intrigued the medical team present on set was that, despite the real injuries Caviezel was suffering, he showed no signs of pain during filming. It was as if he were in an altered state of consciousness. Dr. Marco Benedetti, the doctor responsible for monitoring the actor, documented in reports that were kept secret that Caviezel showed pain resistance incompatible with the injuries he was suffering. But it was during the filming of the crucifixion that the most inexplicable events occurred. Caviezel remained nailed to the cross for hours in adverse weather conditions, hypothermia, dehydration, real wounds. His physical condition deteriorated rapidly, but something extraordinary began happening around him. Crew members noticed that a different light fell upon him, even on cloudy days. The cameras captured this luminosity, but technicians couldn't explain its origin. Monica Bellucci, who played Mary Magdalene, described in an interview that during the crucifixion scenes, she felt as if she were really witnessing Jesus Christ's death. "It was no longer Jim there on the cross," she said. "It was someone I recognized in a way I can't explain. I cried real tears during all the takes, not because I was acting, but because something inside me knew that was true." The extras who played Roman soldiers began reporting recurring nightmares after filming, dreams where they really tortured Jesus Christ and woke up with an overwhelming sense of guilt. Some sought priests for confession, others simply abandoned production without explanation. One of the extras, Giuseppe Torretti, was found crying uncontrollably in his trailer after a flagellation scene, repeating, "I didn't want to do that to him. I didn't want to do that to him." During night filming, even stranger events began occurring. Inexplicable lights appeared on the hills around the set. They weren't production spotlights. They were lights that moved intelligently, as if observing the filming. Security guards reported sightings of figures in white robes nearby, but when they went to investigate, they found no one. Francesco De Vito, who played Peter, had an experience that changed his life forever. During Peter's denial scene, when he was supposed to deny knowing Jesus, De Vito simply couldn't pronounce the words. Mel Gibson asked for several retakes, but with each attempt, De Vito froze. When he finally managed to say the words, he collapsed in convulsive crying that lasted hours. He later said he physically felt the pain of betrayal, as if he were really abandoning someone he loved. The atmosphere on set became so intense that Gibson instituted mandatory prayer breaks between the heavier scenes. Priests were called to bless the filming location regularly. Even so, inexplicable events continued happening. Equipment working perfectly began failing during specific scenes, but returned to normal functioning afterward. Cameras captured images that weren't being filmed, as if recording events from 2,000 years ago. But what happened after filming was even more impressive than the events during production. Jim Caviezel, who should have become one of Hollywood's biggest stars after the monumental success of The Passion of the Christ, simply disappeared from the main spotlights. Not by his own choice, but because something very strange began happening in his career. Sources close to the industry revealed that, after the film, Caviezel was discreetly placed on an unofficial blacklist in Hollywood. Not for the reasons you imagine. It wasn't just for playing Jesus or being associated with Mel Gibson. It was because executives and directors working with him reported disturbing experiences during filming of other projects. What most frightened professionals working with Caviezel was that he seemed to have developed extreme sensitivity to suffering situations. During scenes involving violence or pain, even being fiction, Caviezel reacted physically in an inexplicable way. It reached the point where producers avoided casting him for roles requiring these characteristics, not because he wasn't competent, but because sets became too emotionally charged for the crew to handle. But the most disturbing story involving Caviezel after The Passion of the Christ happened during the filming of Deja Vu with Denzel Washington in 2006. During a scene where his character suffered a serious accident, Caviezel suddenly stopped filming and knelt down, beginning to pray in Aramaic. The language he had learned to play Jesus, but supposedly had forgotten after years without practice. Denzel Washington, present at the scene, later reported being deeply moved by the incident. Jim wasn't acting at that moment, Washington said in an interview not widely publicized. He was really praying, and I felt something sacred was happening there. The whole crew felt it. It was one of the most spiritual moments I've ever witnessed on a film set. From that event, rumors began circulating in Hollywood that Caviezel had developed some kind of gift after playing Jesus. They weren't malicious rumors, but whispers that he had somehow been touched by the experience. People close to him reported that Caviezel had become able to perceive when others were going through spiritual crises, offering words of comfort that seemed to come from wisdom he didn't possess before. For Mel Gibson, the post-Passion of the Christ period was marked by a series of scandals and controversies that seemed to emerge from nowhere. His career, which should have been catapulted by the film's success, went into free fall. The 2006 incident when he was arrested for drunk driving and made anti-Semitic comments was just the beginning of a sequence of events that destroyed his reputation. But sources close to Gibson revealed that he interpreted these events not as coincidences, but as spiritual consequences of having messed with sacred forces. In private conversations, Gibson reportedly said that making The Passion of the Christ was like declaring war against darkness, and darkness fought back. He believed the attacks on his reputation and career were part of a spiritual battle that began the moment he decided to tell Jesus' story in such a visceral and real way. The technical crew that worked on the film also experienced profound changes in their lives. Carlo Poggioli, art director, converted to Catholicism during production, and later dedicated himself exclusively to religious-themed projects. Caleb Deschanel, cinematographer, reported that after The Passion of the Christ, he could never film violent scenes the same way again, as he always remembered the real suffering he witnessed on set. One of the most documented cases is Gian Michelini, the assistant director who was struck by lightning twice during filming. Michelini, who was agnostic before production, became a devout Christian after the experience. He reported that the first time he was struck by lightning, during the Sermon on the Mount scene, he had a vision of Jesus telling him that some need to be touched more directly to believe. The second time Michelini was struck, during the crucifixion, he said he felt no pain, only a sensation of absolute peace. Doctors who examined him were perplexed by his instant recovery and the fact that he suffered no sequelae from either incident. Today, Michelini works as a spiritual counselor and frequently tells his experience as a testimony of faith. The silence that settled over the supernatural events of The Passion of the Christ was not accidental. Shortly after filming ended, rumors began circulating that very specific confidentiality agreements were signed by the crew. Not the usual Hollywood contracts about spoilers or production details, but clauses that specifically prohibited reporting experiences of a spiritual or inexplicable nature during filming. Legal sources close to the production revealed that these contracts were an initiative by Mel Gibson himself, who feared that supernatural reports would overshadow the film's central message. Gibson apparently believed that if the inexplicable events became public, critics and skeptics would use this to discredit the entire work, labeling it as religious propaganda based on collective hysteria. But not everyone involved respected these clauses. In 2019, 15 years after the film's release, a sound technician from the production, identified only as Alessandro M., broke the silence on a small Italian podcast. His revelations were so disturbing that the episode was removed from the air in less than 48 hours, but not before being downloaded and shared clandestinely by thousands of people. Alessandro reported that during recording of the crucifixion scenes, audio equipment captured sounds that weren't being produced on set. Voices in Aramaic that didn't belong to any present actor, laments and cries that seemed to come from impossible places, and at some moments, what he described as heavenly choir that made everyone present stop their activities and listen in reverent silence. Most disturbing was that these audios, when analyzed later, contained words and phrases in Aramaic that none of the consulted linguists could completely translate. They were dialects so ancient they seemed to come directly from the 1st century. Alessandro kept some of these recordings for years, but revealed they began causing strange events in his house. Flickering lights, drastically changing temperatures, and a constant sensation of a watching presence. In 2020, these recordings reached the hands of Dr. Michael Heiser, a specialist in ancient Semitic languages, who was genuinely perplexed by what he heard. These are fragments of 1st century Galilean Aramaic, Heiser said in analysis not officially published. But they contain linguistic constructions that theoretically shouldn't exist in modern records. It's as if someone who lived in that time was speaking. Another crew member who broke the silence was a makeup artist, identified only as Lucia, who in 2021 revealed her experiences during production on an obscure Catholic blog. According to her, working on Jim Caviezel's face during the Passion scenes became a transformative spiritual experience. There were moments when I was applying the fake wounds and they seemed to become real under my fingers, she wrote. Lucia reported that during application of the Crown of Thorns makeup, small drops of blood appeared on Caviezel's forehead, even though there was nothing that could cause them. When she cleaned the blood and re-examined the area, she found small perforations in the skin that weren't there moments before. It was as if Christ's suffering was manifesting physically through Jim, she wrote. But perhaps the most impressive account came from Risto Jivkov, the Bulgarian actor who played John, the beloved apostle. Zhivkov, who died of cancer in 2023, left a detailed diary of his experiences during the Passion of the Christ, which was discovered by his family after his death. The diary, written in Bulgarian and later translated, contains revelations that would completely change public perception of the film if they were widely disclosed. Zhivkov wrote that from the first day on set, he began having vivid dreams where he conversed directly with the historical John. These dreams were so real that he woke up with knowledge about details of Jesus' life that weren't in the canonical Gospels, information that, when researched later, aligned with apocryphal texts that Zhivkov had never read. Most extraordinary is that Zhivkov documented that this information began influencing his interpretation in the film. He developed gestures, expressions, and mannerisms that weren't in the script, but which Mel Gibson inexplicably approved, saying they seemed completely authentic. It was as if Zhivkov were channeling the real essence of the Apostle John. During filming of the scene where John remains at the foot of the cross, while the other apostles fled, Zhivkov experienced what he described as mystical union with his historical character. "For a moment, I was no longer Christo playing John," he wrote. "I was John, 2,000 years ago, watching my Lord die. The pain was real, the love was real, the desperate faith was real." This episode was witnessed by several crew members who reported that Zhivkov remained at the foot of the cross crying for over an hour after Gibson yelled, "Cut." He didn't respond when called by name and only came to when Jim Caviezel, still nailed to the cross, whispered something in Aramaic that no one else understood. The experience transformed Zhivkov so profoundly that he dedicated the rest of his life to theological studies and missionary work. In his last diary entries, he wrote that the cancer that eventually killed him was a small price to pay for having touched eternity. He died at 48, convinced he had fulfilled a specific divine purpose by playing John. But perhaps the most intriguing silence came from Jim Caviezel himself. Despite occasionally mentioning some of the physical events he suffered during filming, he never spoke publicly about the deeper spiritual experiences. In rare interviews, when directly questioned about possible supernatural manifestations, Caviezel simply responds, "Some things are too sacred to be shared." People close to Caviezel revealed that he maintains a private diary about his experience playing Jesus, but that he swore never to make it public while alive. Jim says those pages contain secrets that should only be revealed when God determines the right moment, said a close source. The diary apparently documents not only the supernatural events from filming, but also visions and revelations that Caviezel claims to have received during the process. Today, almost 21 years after the release of The Passion of the Christ, the few crew members who occasionally speak about the experience always do so with the same observation. We weren't just making a movie. We were participating in something that connected us directly with the sacred. And perhaps that's exactly why so many chose silence. Some experiences are too big for words. Some truths are too powerful to be treated as entertainment. What few know is that the supernatural events of The Passion of the Christ didn't end when the cameras stopped recording. They continued reverberating in the life of each person involved, creating a pattern of spiritual transformation that persists to this day. And now, with Mel Gibson officially confirming that filming of the sequel, The Resurrection of the Christ, will begin in 2025, a question haunts all who experienced the first experience. Will the miracles happen again? Jim Caviezel, at 56, accepted returning to the role of Jesus, knowing exactly what that might mean. In a recent interview on Raymond Arroyo's channel, he admitted being afraid, but said something prophetic. "If I wasn't afraid, I wouldn't like working as an actor, because one is never ready and this is a war." The word war wasn't chosen by chance. Caviezel knows he's about to enter a spiritual battle again. The use of digital rejuvenation technology to make Caviezel look 33 again adds an even more mysterious layer to the project. Gibson described the film as an acid trip and revealed that the narrative will include Christ's descent into hell, the fall of angels, and events that challenge any traditional cinematographic representation. To tell the story correctly, you have to start with the fall of the angels. That means you'll be somewhere else, in another realm. You have to go to hell, Gibson said. Sources close to pre-production revealed that Gibson is taking even more intense spiritual precautions for the sequel. Priests are being consulted from the script development phase, special blessings are being planned for all equipment, and each crew member will undergo rigorous spiritual preparation before stepping on set. Gibson apparently learned from the first experience that messing with the sacred requires sacred protection. But what intrigues most is the very nature of the story to be told. The 3 days between crucifixion and resurrection are, biblically, the most mysterious of Christ's existence. According to Christian tradition, it was during this period that Jesus descended to hell to liberate the souls of the righteous. Gibson plans to visually show this spiritual journey, including encounters with fallen angels and representations of Satan himself. Randall Wallace, co-screenwriter of the project, revealed in an interview not widely publicized that script development has been the most challenging writing experience of his career. We're trying to put on paper events that happened in dimensions we don't completely understand, Wallace said. There are moments when I feel we're not writing, but being guided to write. Jim Caviezel confirmed that the project may extend to 2 or 3 parts. Such is the amplitude of the story they intend to tell. It will be the biggest film in history, he stated, echoing his previous declaration. There are things I can't say that will shock the audience. It's great. Stay tuned. Caviezel's confidence suggests he's already had access to script elements he considers revolutionary. What impresses most is Gibson's determination to maintain the same brutal authenticity of the original film, even dealing with supernatural elements. He plans to use practical effects whenever possible, combined with cutting-edge CGI, only when absolutely necessary. The idea is for the audience to feel they're witnessing real events, not cinematic fantasy. The death of Hristo Jivkov in 2023, who was to reprise John, created a spiritual dilemma for Gibson. According to close sources, Gibson considers Jivkov's death as a sign that some actors fulfilled their earthly purpose and is reluctant to replace him. There are rumors that Gibson may dedicate the film to Jivkov's memory, or even use digital technology to include his posthumous performance. Lionsgate, which distributes Gibson's films, is investing heavily in the project, with budget estimates reaching $100 million. But company executives reported concerns not financial, but spiritual, about the project. "We know this won't be an ordinary film," said an executive who preferred not to identify himself. "We're preparing for events that may transcend cinema." The locations chosen for filming also carry spiritual significance. Malta, Italy, and possibly Mexico were selected not only for their visual qualities, but for being places with strong Christian tradition and histories of Marian apparitions. Gibson believes filming on sacred ground may facilitate the manifestation of benevolent supernatural events. The filming schedule was also carefully planned to coincide with significant dates of the Christian calendar. Production is set to begin during Lent 2025 and culminate during Holy Week, with resurrection scenes being filmed exactly on Easter Sunday. Gibson believes this temporal synchronization may intensify any spiritual manifestation that might occur. Perhaps the most intriguing aspect is Gibson's own motivation for making the sequel after 2 decades. In private conversations, he reportedly revealed having recurring dreams where he's instructed to complete the story. Close sources say Gibson believes the Passion of the Christ was only the first act of a larger mission, and the resurrection is the fulfillment of a spiritual calling he cannot ignore. The expectation is that the film will be released during Easter 2027, divided into two parts that will be shown 40 days apart, symbolizing the period between resurrection and Christ's ascension. This strategy isn't just commercial, but spiritual. Gibson wants the audience to live the mystery of resurrection in real time, experiencing the same waiting and anticipation of the first disciples. If these revelations awakened something in your spirit, show it by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing in the comments how God has manifested in your own life. Your testimony may touch the heart of someone who needs this message. Join our community of truth seekers and continue with us on this journey of spiritual discoveries that can change your life forever. What happened during the Passion of the Christ wasn't just cinema. It was an encounter between the temporal and eternal, between human and divine. And now, with the resurrection approaching, the question that remains is, will we be ready to witness the impossible becoming reality again? The events of 2004 were just the beginning of something much greater. And all of us, somehow, are invited to participate in this continuation of the most important story ever told. The spiritual war that began on that Italian set continues, and each of us must choose which side we're on. Because when God decides to use cinema to touch hearts, not even Hollywood can resist the power of the sacred.